Kwite is a commentary YouTuber who I've known since around April of 2019. We first met at a YouTube event and that's where we became friendly. Though I wouldn't say we are friends, we do have mutuals, and I have occasionally drunken DM'd him saying I miss hanging out with him. His reputation, however, was destroyed back in February after a twit longer was posted, labeling Kwite as a emotional user who would often deadname him, call him slurs, and gaslight him over a period of 6 years. This post was made by a Twitter user called Orion. When the Twitter longer dropped and the silence remained in Kwite's corner, as well as the screenshots posted exposing Kwite to act as backing evidence. And for the most part, this worked in Orion's favour with floods of support, but also waves of hate and attack towards Kwite. And at this point, Kwite's face had been leaked too. On the 11th of March 2023, Kwite posted an hour-and-a-half long response to the claims debunking the majority of these allegations. I'm now going to dive into the main points Kwite made in this video, and though I feel all his points were important, I do understand that some people don't have time to watch the entire video. So take this as a wide summary of what actually happened. Kwite addresses the biggest claim straight away of him being a racist. Orion alleged that when Kwite was on vacation in their city, they met up to go to a trampoline park and to see the Black Panther movie. Orion then claimed they were flirtatious, but when it came to sex, that he got cold feet, and this is when the rape took place in the back of his car. He then goes into Kwite refusing to stop when he asked him to, and even claims that he made him buy popcorn to make up for getting cold feet. Kwite debunks this with a strong argument to debunk his case here. He firstly shows a clip where Orion describes the day out completely differently, and there isn't any mention of sexual or romantic activity. This was an original testimony posted back in 2018.
Cut to February where we met up for the second time, and I remember it was February because we went to see Black Panther. It was fun, and I distinctly remember him getting out of my car, but stopping midway and saying, "Just remember I really care about you," and then closing the door, which made me feel really good because, you know, this was my best friend. We had met up for the second time.
He then goes on to explain the events of February 18th. They were in a mall in a shop, and Kwite saw a plushie that he wanted to buy for himself. He explains he usually buys things for himself when he's with friends and doesn't like people paying for him. This was around the time he had success with YouTube and had money rolling in as well. Orion insisted on paying for it though, and Kwite recalls a conversation with the cashier where they were bickering of who should pay for it, to which the cashier responded something like, "Sometimes you just gotta let them pay for it." Kwite was direct and clear that he felt comfortable paying with it, to which Orion responded with something along the lines of, "I'll let you buy it, but only if you kiss me later." Kwite backs this up further by providing screenshots of another situation that mirrors Orion's attitude just a day before the alleged incident took place. Kwite regrets agreeing to it, but in person and not in text, he felt awkward around it and decided to pay for the item himself, but saw it as light-hearted and didn't think Orion would continue to push so much and make him uncomfortable with it. He then discusses the kiss that took place in Orion's car that he felt pressured into, and emphasizes that consent is still important and you shouldn't feel guilty for pulling out last minute, even if this is just a kiss. This to Kwite was the only thing that ever happened between them, and after it he was left feeling strange.
But I try to communicate that I don't want to in a relatively playful but straightforward way. I'll pay for them and dodge your affection. And even at that point, Orion still wasn't taking no for an answer. He doubled down and said he was going to smooch me anyways. Nah, you can't dodge the smooch. It will find you and it will smooch when you least expect it. There is no dodging, only smooch. Maybe he meant that playfully, but I didn't respond to it because I was uncomfortable with the way he was talking to me. I'd said my piece on how I felt about buying the snacks as well as getting kissed, and he just kept going. I'm sure that when Orion tried to pay for my stuff, it was meant with good intentions. But in these moments, I set a clear boundary of what I preferred that he essentially said he'd only respect conditionally.
Kwite expresses that Orion was always the one discussing intimacy and pushing for it when he felt uncomfortable with it. He also talks about Orion's forwardness with sex and DMs that actually got used against Kwite as evidence. DMs that were cropped, however.
One of the screenshots Orion used as proof of his claims is literally Orion floating and initiating the idea of us hooking up when we see each other, and my response is being unsure, then stating a reason why I wouldn't want to do it. He also cropped out the next message where he's the one to push for it even further by asking if I have condoms.
Kwite addresses the point of them agreeing to take each other's virginities by saying that he never agreed to this, by backing up screenshots of him being hesitant with the whole idea of it. He makes a few quick points that he was in their city only because of vacation and agreed to meet up with Orion because he had a friend in the area. He adds Orion asked him to visit south, to which Kwite was clear in his response of no. This leads to him then mocking Kwite's troubles with anxiety around sex. He then shows proof of Orion being aggressive and threatening sex when Kwite is busy or didn't respond to him. The next point he addresses is Orion claiming the pair were ex-friends and partners that were on and off from 2017 to 2018 in February.
The screenshot Orion showed of him asking who he could tell about us dating, where I respond but I prefer to keep it to mutual friends, but I ultimately trust his judgment with whoever. That was said in the only period of time we have both agreed on the term dating, a period of time that lasted less than 2 days. What Orion never showed was that at the end of that conversation those lines were cherry-picked from, there was an abrupt tone shift where the conversation switched from something two people freshly in a new relationship might say to each other to something more like strangers making small talk for the first time. This is because the night before, barely a day into us being together, I broke it off.
He also explains that he broke it off because he feared Orion was just a rebound, as they were together just a week after he broke up with a toxic ex-boyfriend who agreed they could possibly work it out. He said this and then got with one of Kwite's friends the next day though, however. So this was clearly still hurting Kwite, and he didn't want to jump into anything too soon, which is very fair and valid. Kwite then admits that he not only has performance issues, but is still, to this day recording the video, a virgin. Kwite shows DMs of him venting his issues with anxiety around sex, which was 3 months before the alleged incident took place. He makes another point here that this is not enough time at all for him to fix these issues for the assault to have taken place. He proves his anxiety further by showing an example from just this year in Brighton when he pulled away from a guy after getting cold feet with him after making out in a club with him called Club Revenge. He explains that a lot of his anxiety around sex stems from being assaulted twice in his life. Once when he was 17 by someone twice his age in a fast food job, and another when he was 19 in a club. Back in 2018, Orion went on a channel called Suspicious to give an early testimony of Kwite and the apparent emotional abuse he had suffered. As mentioned earlier, he gives an entirely different recall of events and also expresses publicly that Kwite suffered from self-harm, going further by threatening blackmail to Kwite by claiming he had shit on him, as well as secrets that he could potentially expose Kwite with one day. Orion gets the timeline wrong though, by claiming they met in January 2016, when in fact they first started talking in January 2017. Kwite makes a point here that some may excuse Orion for misspeaking, but points out that rightfully this is something he does throughout the video. Black Panther now happening in February 2017, a whole year before the movie even was out, and then claimed he was ghosted by Kwite a few weeks after the movie situation, but then in his recent testimony claimed it was a few months after. The reality was closer to Orion's first testimony when they fell out on a Discord call in March of 2018.
In the period of absolute silence where I didn't speak to Orion through text, call, or otherwise at all was only 3 days long. Orion also claimed I called him out of nowhere, when in reality I was returning the single call Orion had given me over those 3 days only 2 hours after he had originally sent it.
He then spends time addressing the fact that Orion disrespected his boundaries a lot. Orion makes a point that Kwite told him that he is not allowed to take pictures with him at all, and that only Kwite was allowed to take pictures of him, but Kwite emphasizes that this rule and that the incident of him taking pictures never happened. Kwite does stress about the fact that he was anxious about his face potentially being leaked because he was a faceless creator at the time. I can sort of back up Kwite here a little bit as well. So I met Kwite in April of 2019, and then in August when we were in another event, he actually encouraged me to take a selfie with him. It was in a club in Birmingham, I think called Prism, which is a bit ironic because Birmingham is a fucking prison, but I never remember him being weird about it. In fact, like I said, I'm pretty sure it was him that encouraged me to take a selfie with him. Orion claims he had pictures with Kwite but didn't post them, which was a lie, because he did leak Kwite's face in the roundup of these allegations, hence why Kwite had to face reveal in the first place.
Not only did Orion obviously post the pictures of my face because of this current situation, but he also shared them around to people I didn't know at least around or before September 2018, as well as sharing other photos of me that I had taken of myself and only shared with a select group of people.
He dives further into his boundaries being disregarded, with such as hugs when he was going through a rough time, and that platonic touch was complicated for him. This was crossed, however, when they met up in June of 2018, where Kwite met Orion's dad, who was following them around the entire day because he was skeptical about a random man in his house from the internet. He even stayed in the room when they watched the movie together. Kwite claims he had no plans to do anything physically intimate with Orion that day. He also makes another point that Orion had expressed that his parents were often toxic and even got violent. So this whole situation left him in a terrible state of anxiety. As mentioned though, Orion crossed boundaries when he kept leaning on Kwite, and you can see in the pictures that he is clearly uncomfortable with the touch. As I said, the main issue with this here is that it seemed like Orion was using Kwite as a way to piss off his parents, which made Kwite panic that he was gonna get attacked or something like that.
You might argue, did you really care if you told Orion you had a crush on them the next day? But that wouldn't change that this was not the case when it happened, and that I broke it off with Orion less than 2 days after.
He also calls Orion out for lying by claiming Kwite deactivate his Discord account, which never happened. This was an attempt to make Kwite look dodgy. Kwite debunked this early on by posting a small update on his Discord server though. When Orion got exposed for being wrong about this, he accused Kwite of using a bot to delete messages from Kwite's side. He was also accused of using the D slur against Orion, as well as dead-naming him throughout conversations. This, according to Kwite, never happened, and he backs this up by providing chat logs from different sites such as Skype. Furthermore, he fights his corner by explaining that Orion would often go in downward negative spirals in which they would leave Kwite feeling helpless and responsible when all his support and effort to help Orion were shut down. A big point here to add is that Kwite is half Filipino, and Orion was actually racist towards him and would often refer to him as the C word and would use Asian stereotypes to insult him. Kwite also makes a point that he doesn't have much evidence, but does have DM conversations with friends asking him if he was comfortable with being called these things. He admits that he isn't that bothered by it, but sometimes is, and did tell Orion that it was fine with the jokes. But this makes Orion a massive hypocrite. Kwite also takes accountability for some old edgy comments he made here. He then goes into detail about Orion's strong level of codependency, which was proven by multiple text conversations between the pair, with Orion often dropping a lot on him, leaving Kwite always having to help to try pull him out of the hole, with often no success. This behaviour was one of the main reasons why he cut off Orion as a friend, in which Orion spoke about in his original testimony back in 2018. The idea of Kwite having other friends he seemed closer with, or just in general, came off as a threat to Orion, and made them insecure about his own friendship with him.
Orion hinged his sense of self-worth on what I say to him, and as a result would rely on me to provide validation that he couldn't find within himself. That is so unbelievably toxic, because now I've been made responsible for another person's sense of self-worth.
Kwite also admits that he himself did open up a couple of times about his own issues with self-harm, and that Orion was a good friend to him. He, however, had other friends he would talk to about it as well, and he didn't drop the entire pressure onto him. These comments are the same ones that Orion would use to run to the public in 2018 that Kwite had problems with self-harm. He then addresses the point of their relationship being socially transactional, according to Orion. Things such as getting on the podcast were turned down by Kwite, as well as fan art being drawn that Kwite later offered him money for his time, but Orion would turn it down and claim that just talking to him was enough. Orion also makes a point that he helped create his Sona with the hood, mask and glasses, but Kwite disproves this immediately with the following clip from 2016.
How y'all doing? Hello and welcome to my 500 subscribers special. As you can see, I've put in a lot of effort to ensuring that the audio quality of this video is top notch.
A time and milestone I hit a month before ever first speaking with Orion. There's even older, though still now deleted, examples of me appearing as the exact character Orion drew in those sprites.
He then shows another clip showing the first time he used a surgical mask because it was the only thing at the time that didn't muffle his voice with the microphone, and he just decided to stick with it. It seemed like Orion was trying to take credit for his success, and it was just overall a really strange point in his twitlonger. After the call in March 2018, in where he cut Orion off, he took to his private Twitter to bitch about Kwite and his privacy, as well as attaching his name. Orion would then go on to befriend other creators who made videos against Kwite. He then addresses another creator called Lord Bung, who posted a long text on their community tab in support of Orion, saying that everything was true and that Kwite was aggressive in their final call with Orion, and a gaslighter when she stepped in as an equal remediator. In Kwite's call with Orion, he admits that he was angry in the call and did snap, but with all that had happened, it's not hard to see why. This was a person he had distanced himself for half a year ago, who had exposed self-harm to the public, as well as labeling him as emotionally abusive with zero evidence to back it up in the video posted in 2018. Bung and Orion had also been in a past relationship to which he recalls to it lasting in 2021 and last year. So this as well does show a side of bias. Alongside this though, Kwite's stress also came from being affected by a hurricane in his neighborhood which actually flooded his basement. He lost a lot of his equipment and he was in a panic state if he was going to lose his career.
This was something I also talked about with Orion after we reached a truce of sorts in that call. The flooding caused me to have to delay the meeting till later that day and was an ongoing situation with my family that didn't exist in the backdrop but was an active problem during this whole thing.
Kwite also addresses that Orion had leaked his face back in 2018 after another friend sent him the photo in which he could only have got it from him. And in the call, Orion straight up denies that this ever happened. Straight after this call happened in September of 2018, Orion tried to rectify the friendship by asking to be friends again. And for a short amount of time, Kwite was in communication with Orion again, mostly in Twitter DMs. But this ended up back where they started, with them not talking again. Things stayed quiet for the next few years, with the occasional passing comment that Kwite was a shit person. He recalls finding an account echoing similar beliefs to Orion, who spent years dunking on him whenever he was mentioned on Twitter.
And it was a few years later where the Hail Mary finally dropped, where in early 2022, unprompted and in a reply thread completely unrelated to me, this guy was the first person to ever call me a and it became apparent that this whole thing was an event that they'd been anticipating. The day the allegations dropped, they said, Kwite's only hope now is stop Asian hate. In my opinion, in a situation like this, that is very out of line.
This situation left Kwite's face exposed with that label now attached to it. Kwite ends his response by admitting he was left feeling anxious to even leave the house when everything came out, as he feared his own safety now. He closes off admitting fault with the Slazo situation and stresses that situations like this need to stop. Since Kwite released his video, guilt has only been highlighted furthermore from Orion though. On the day he dropped his video, Orion would take to Twitter to post a now proven fake doctor's PTSD diagnosis with spelling mistakes and sentences even repeated, alongside fake signatures in a clear, last-minute stupid attempt to try flip everything once more, and proves to me at least that Orion has negative intentions. I remember hearing about these allegations and seeing a lot of people jumping on them immediately. I myself decided to stay neutral on it. I simply wanted to disconnect from it and wait to at least hear what Kwite had to say before coming to a solid conclusion. I don't want this video to come across as though you shouldn't believe victims, because a lot of the times these things are really difficult to prove, and as someone who has friends who have gone through it, I've seen both ends of the sides, both falsely accused and guilty. It is fine to take sides with a friend, but what I have learned myself from this Lazo situation and being someone who jumped on it, tweeting publicly about it could backfire and make you look like the idiot. Overall, this situation is just extremely messy, and with Orion's current response, it does favour heavily in Kwite's corner. I really hope this video was helpful. I want to send my support to Kwite and anyone who's been affected by this situation. And if you did find this video helpful, then I would really appreciate if you could subscribe. But for now, I'll see you in the next one.